is Tobias Reiss. I'm working for Xibu, a Munich-based company, and very focused on JavaScript. And today I'd like to ask the question, how do you test? And I have another question, how can JavaScript benefit from a community that tests? So how do you test? I assume every one of us is testing actually. So either with your debugger for Node or on your within your browser. That is definitely testing. That's no doubt. But testing through debugger is not very efficient. I mean, that's the point if that's your only test. And today I'd like to discuss some test strategies that are not always just not automated like the debugging console. That's, I think, is one of the main problems if the debugging console is your only test, because the test is your secret. So everyone else in your team is forced to call you somehow if you are on holidays. And that's a big issue, I guess, for every one of us. And it doesn't fit properly in any deployment pipeline. No one ever would open a console shortly before he wants to deploy something just to test everything. No. So choose an efficient mix of tests. So that of course depends on your use case. There is no one final solution I'm going to present today, definitely not. But you should know your friends. But who are your friends? Those are some of your friends. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I try to grasp at least 3 of them, and those are the unit test, integration test, and functional test. And, well, I'm pretty sure there are people in this room who might think, but who don't share my opinion about functional tests, who don't share what I think about functional tests. Maybe they think it's something completely different. That's okay and fair, and I would be happy if you talk about it afterwards, and if you don't interrupt me while I'm speaking right now. So how can we measure what test is good for us? And if I say us, I'd like to split in 2 groups. So those developers, I call them developers, who do they have a daily workflow and they should use a kind of test, and those who are called Q&A, those should have another kind of test. So let's go to the first part. So that means you, as a developer, should be able to execute the test very fast. Whereby executing the test very slow is something a QA can do, but that's not for your daily workflow. The second one is, I would like to run my test automatically and not manual. And the third one is, I'd like to test only a small unit and not the whole system, because testing the whole system can be very complex. So as I said, I try to split them up. So slow, manual, and complex. I'd like to address those kind of tests to the QA. And fast, automatic, and unit-based, or module, we just focus on the module, I'd like to address to the devs. And of course, it depends on the resources you have within your company. It's sometimes you, as a developer, you are not just a developer, you're also the QA. That, of course, can happen, but there are projects where I completely split up those tasks. That's just a summary of what I've said. So, test that executes fast, run automatically, and a focus on simplicity fits best to your daily workflow, and all other tests happen just once a day or less often. So what is a unbalanced test strategy? I picked that picture because from the outside it looks very cool. That house. It has a door, it has windows, everything is there. So, but the internals might not be finished yet. So, make sure by choosing the right test strategy that you come from both sides, from the unit and the system. If you pick just one of them, you might have problems, and you run into those situations where where people complaining about finding a bug, then it was fixed, and then they found the bug again, and then it was fixed, and you ask yourself, how can I get around that problem? And that's a good strategy to come from both sides. Other problem is if you just go always with the same tools. And if you try to use that tool every time for all your problems, because obviously there are different tools to test units and different tools to test the system. I don't know of any tools that try to do everything, and if there exists, they might fail. For
example, multi-tool.
Sorry?
I use my multi-tool. It has a screwdriver and...
Cool. That's a fair point.
Knife.
Yeah.
Or like, for example, a Swiss Army knife. It's also a very good multi-tool.
That's a cool.
For a lot of things.
If you're serious right now, then we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
The third point is check your skills. Because if you always do the same stuff, you might stuck in what you're doing. So practice. Practice, because sometimes you just don't have the use cases in your daily workflow. It just happens because you have a project that's very successful and you do it for years. But like you do practicing for other stuff as well. If you go, are you doing sports? Well, if you would do sport, then you would practice. Right? So it's the same for coding. You should practice coding, and you should start doing it today. Because finding the right test strategy takes years. You get used to it, you get used to all your friends, as I said before, you get used to unit test, what is a functional test, what is an integration test. But it takes time. So start today. So in the news, I saw this one, and obviously you can tackle that problem from a lot of sides. Like, why is your editor not screaming and stuff like that? But today I'd like to talk about tests, and what is missing here is a unit test. Just testing that function. And you would immediately see that there's something totally wrong. And I hope you see it as well. Curly braces are missing. You never come to the next line. You never come here. You always go to fail. So that's important about unit tests. And I wonder what test strategy exists within Apple. Unit tests. Unit tests are a small part of your big system, of your app. Every unit has an API. Make sure to only test the API. Don't test the implementation. I'll tell you why in a short. And if you create a test, make it the ideal world. Test only the API, and fake the rest. What is the rest? So first, test the API, not the implementation. Your small unit still has kind of a communication to the other units within your app. I just picked 3 times of very obvious and familiar API calls, like you communicate to each other, create object and return an object. The second was just getter, and the third one is a setter. This is your API. This is the way you communicate with the rest of the API. This is your contract with the rest of the API. Means the rest of the API assumes that that stuff is working. And assuming that is great, because now you have better tests. Because you don't have to use the rest of the API, the rest of the modules within your app or external stuff. But I come to that one later. Let's stay here and talk about your API. And the cool stuff about testing just the API right now is that you actually documented what the API is supposed to do, and then let others read your mind. Why is it so? Well, it's so because if you have a look at your tests, you can see what you thought while developing. So even if you did it wrong or not as expected, it's obvious when you see the test, and you can fix it, and nobody have to call you when you're on holidays. Don't leak internals. Why? Because if you don't test internal stuff, you can touch the internal stuff without touching the tests. You can remove stuff, you can make it nicer, you can change it regarding performance, regarding whatever, but you can change the internals of your module, and you can just run the test, and the test makes sure that the API is working as expected. Let's talk about the ideal world. And as I said, you have contract. You have a contract to the modules within your app, and you're using other modules that also share contract, and those kind of contracts are allowed to fake within your unit test. So you don't have to really wait for seconds if you use a timer. You don't have to even have a network connection if you test your external service in the cloud. You just don't need that stuff, because because all the services and also the timer, they all have an API, and those API can completely mock if you didn't wrote it, or spied in such cases where they are also part of your app. Mock and spy, that's just terms to split those different use cases, and I'm sure there are people who mixing them up all the time, maybe even on purpose, because they don't like so different terms. There you can say fake, spy, mock, whatever, but the idea is always the same. Make it possible that you can run your unit test super fast by faking your external dependencies.
What's the exact difference between a mock and a spy?
So if you already have the module, the complete module, because it is within your repository, you import it. Yeah, you import it within your test because it is there, and then you spy it. Means you override the existing functionality. But that's in contrast to mock, where you don't even need the source code of the external dependency. You don't need the real API of your cloud service. You don't read the real timer. You know the API, so you can create your own object that has the same API and just use them at the end. People mixing it up, because at the end you have then the mock, and then you spy on the mock again. So that's the point. But I think the most important point is that you fake all the dependencies. Because if you fake all the dependencies, you don't rely that the service is online. You can just run your test automatically and you can run it very fast because no dependencies, no real timer. So now let's talk about integration tests, and I'm just talking about one use case of integration test. An integration test tries to test the next level of unit test. Means you have two modules, everyone has its own unit test, and now one module talks to the other. Those tests are not covered by unit tests, right? So the integration test now tries to test the communication between modules. And one use case I like very much is if you don't have an existing library that, let's say, shims all the DOM like you want. So you're using jQuery, and jQuery just they don't care about the HTML media element. So you use the HTML media API, and now you notice that it's not working properly on all devices, it's not working properly on all different browsers. Some property might not work in Firefox and the other one might not work in Chrome, whatever, and you ending up trying to shim that API by introducing new API. And then you make the mistake and coupling your shim too much with your application. And now you have a problem. Let's say you have a problem that just happens on one browser. Now, because those things are too much coupled, you need to run your whole application on that browser. Okay, we can find a solution for that. The solution is you create a very thin abstraction layer of, for example, the HTML media element that is not coupled to your application. You can even reuse it for completely different applications and completely different projects. The same goes for services in the cloud. You create a very thin abstraction layer, and you only test the abstraction layer together with the real service and together with the real DOM on that particular environment, or on all environments you want to support for your application. Those tests are often automated. Often means it would be very good if they are automated, but sometimes it's hard to automate every test, so you end up running those tests manually. It depends. They're slow, of course, because you need the real service, but those tests can run independently from your daily workflow, of course. That's the point of having those integration tests. And now the big advantage is of having such an abstraction layer is within your unit, you just use the API of the abstraction layer, that's a SPI or a mock, whatever, and you can run your unit test again super fast, because the abstraction layer is the ideal world that is supposed to run everywhere. Yeah, that way you can avoid environment-dependent regressions, because if you have a problem just in one environment, you write a test for that particular environment and just for the abstraction layer, not for the whole application. And what's also tricky about that is now you have your abstraction layer and you have your integration test for the abstraction layer. And now there's, let's say, iOS 8, and you want to test, can I support that new environment out of the box? Well, I just run those integration tests on that new box, and then I can make sure everything is going to be working. So let's come back to the news. Apple did a great job by fixing the critical security bug And well, they already had a new version in the pipeline, and now they needed to release that very fast, and they did, and boom. There might be some problems now if you have a multi-screen setup or AirPlay problems occur, something like that. So how can we test that? And that's what I said, you can test it very good if you test your whole application. Functional tests. So you did all of the small pieces within the car. You put them all together, and now you have a car. And now you test the whole car, and you don't care about the internals. You just want that the car works. That's often manual because it's very complex. As you see here, that's very complex. You should definitely do it before you hand out the stuff, before deployment. It's super time consuming, but it verifies if the software meets the requirements. So that's one test strategy. Just one. A possible efficient mix of tests. I choose the unit test for the developer, for a steady workflow, because they're running very fast, and you can refactor daily. You can always be sure that everything is fine. We can focus on features and not regressions. And that test strategy fits perfectly in your deployment or any deployment pipeline. Consider unit tests to be executed all the time. Integration tests, if automated, maybe they're just executed whenever you merge something into your main repository. And functional tests are executed before you deploy.
Tobias, can you ask the audience this question? Yes.
Sure.
Maybe I don't really know functional testing, but what's the difference between functional and E2E testing at the end?
And what?
E2E testing.
End to end?
Yeah, end to end, yeah.
Okay. It can happen that it's the same if you end-to-end test the whole application. Or if you have a bunch of end-to-end tests, it ends up being also like your functional tests. End-to-end just means that you check, for example, let's talk about UI. Check the input, then you maybe open your debugger, you check if all the variables are correct, and you check, does it do the request? Can I see the entry in the database? So end-to-end. And that's...
But I want to ask the audience how you are testing at the moment. Can you please raise your hand up if you are doing tests generally? Okay, functional? Integration? It's the same like functional. And unit tests? Okay, and who of you guys doing test-driven development? Like in the book? Yeah, well. Okay, thanks.
But it's interesting to see that a lot of people here are already using that test strategy because, well, I can see unit and functional. That goes very well because, well, unit is your daily workflow, and functional you do that shortly before you deploy. You check, okay, is my app working? But integration test, I wouldn't have expected so many people do that already. Yes.
We even do design tests. We compare. We created screenshots during the end-to-end tests, and then we have a program which detects the changes between browser and during design.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to test, and as I said, design tests absolutely make sense if you have great UI. That makes sense. Also, performance tests make totally sense. So I'd like to ask now the second question: how can JavaScript benefit of you when you test? And well, let's look at the news. And there's a new editor from GitHub, and they claim. Can you read it? And they claim that because Node.js is integrated, you can choose from 50,000 Node packages right now today, all of them. Great, that's awesome. So we are all very proud of the amount of libraries we have, right? And we need that because they allow for easier development. But choose wisely, because maybe your app ends up being like that. There's so many libraries out there, they're not tested, they're not working. You really need to take care of what you pick. So 50,000 is a great number, but that's not the reality. It's really not the reality. But we have also very good examples where testing works very well. And I'd like to pick some of them. AngularJS is one of them. They even have pre-bundled mocks. So that means for me, I didn't use AngularJS in that regard, but for me that means you have a very lightweight way to add the existing API from AngularJS and just test it without running on every machine, without running on every browser. Because they make sure that everything is working on every browser, because they provide the tests. And what does it mean? It means quality, and quality means trust. So by adding tests, you actually increase the amount of quality and trustability to your library. That's really cool. And if you don't test, you're actually forcing others to test. Namely, the people who want to use your library. They can't trust you. If you have a new release, might be that there's everything broken. Also, those libraries are very inspiring because we want to use the library and we see new ways, we see something's happening. Those libraries now provide mocks. That's also just happened lately that React added add-ons, the test utils. Also, they provide utilities and they provide mocks to test the components of React. And by that, they encourage people to test. And what's really interesting is if they provide all the tests in their repository, we have the same feature relied on for years, and that's use source code. And we can see what did they test, how do they test, and we can maybe copy it, at least you can discuss it. And this should be a normal workflow. If you have a fix for your own library, or if you want to help another developer by providing a fix for his library, you should definitely not just put the fix within the pull request, but also the test. And that does the following: it proves your word. That's the first thing. So the developer don't have to check all the time. Does it make sense what he did? So there's a test. Obviously there was something wrong. I have a super small. If it's a unit test, I have a super small proof of that bug. And that's really easy to review. Another way, and we just talked about it. A great example, Topcode from Adobe CSS library. They have performance tests on all their components. They run it on Nexus 4 and all different Android devices and Chrome. It's not that they only would run it on Chrome, but the Google they are the only ones who provide the tools to measure that. So that's the reason why they only targeting Chrome and Android and stuff where WebKit is running on. But that's great. That makes yourself responsible for every deployment you do. Whenever you deploy, people can have a look at the chart and they can see, okay, you're now getting faster or slower, whatever. That's called product transparency. And that's how I like it. So, what if you don't have tests? Yeah? I mean, I would call this a prototype. And that's fine, we need those libraries too. But make it clear that your library is a prototype. And don't add them to package managers, because it's a prototype. Also cool, external audits of your package. This project is, I think, not really released yet. I don't think that they started auditing modules. They try to audit every single module in NPM. That's really hard. But whatever, the idea is that you have an independent analysis of your module and maybe also get a certificate for your package. And that's great, because then we slowly start to measure on a new factor, and the factor is testing. We don't do that right now. In the news, I just found this thing in my garden, and so how does that depend to JavaScript? But it does. JavaScript is entering new markets, and that's JavaScript is running on hardware, and that's the real world. And you can't just refresh and deploy a new version. You need to make sure that the thing you just released is running. Also running when you're not connected to the internet all the time. That's hard. But what we actually have now is a lot of power. And with great power, comes great responsibility. And that's why testing gets even more important. So what new markets I'm talking about? I'm talking about microcontrollers. You have one, right?
Yes.
Cool. Anybody else ever such a microcontroller yet? Okay. So talking about drones and robots. And there's even more, of course. And it doesn't stop, I guess. And you can't read it, but the point is, Twitter is searching for new developers. And they say, we are huge fans of TDD. And that's for a reason. So testing is in demand. And good people make JavaScript attractive. And people who test, well, that's what I'm saying. People who test are good people, of course. And we should all sharpen our skills. So how can we do that? How can we sharpen our skills? So first of all, discuss and talk about the test strategy. And we can do that today. That's why we meet. So Munich.js is a perfect place. We from Oxibo thought, okay, there are even some holes, and that's the first. We just recently ran the first try of a JavaScript code retreat where you can practice your coding. And maybe Wolfram, do you want to say something about it? Or
I'll go into detail later.
Later. Okay, perfect. So what you can see on the picture is people are really tackling new problems they don't have in their daily workflow. They talk with others about their testing strategy, they try to learn from each other.
And this was in Munich, the job with Kurji.
That was in Munich,
Like
by the way. Yes, and Wolfram will tell you when the next meeting is going to happen. And the next one is, now that you have your unit test, you talk, of course, with your colleagues about it. But after some time, you notice, okay, my colleagues are cool, but I'd like to talk with others as well. And how can I do that? And it would be really nice if we could share our small problems, our small unit tests, maybe you already have a solution, online with others. And we from Xibu created tddbin.com, where you can share your test experience, where whole setup is already done. You can start writing your test immediately. And you can record your stuff. Well, Wolfram will go into detail about that. So, 2 new products from Xibu that are only related to testing, because we think testing is super serious. And yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to talk with you afterwards about your testing strategy.